Good evening, friends. We welcome you to the 41st edition of the Study Circle meeting. Today we have the second part of HR and CE to be explained by Mr. V. Srikanth. Before Mr. Srikanth proceeds, let me ask Mr. Ashok Pati to give a short introduction about it.
Good evening, friends. Today, Siva called me up and said, can you give a welcome address to speaker and the presence of audience here. Introducing Srikanth was an opportunity for me. I immediately grabbed it and said, it's the thing that I've been waiting for long. In fact, I was a little bit jealous of Srini when he was introducing Srikanth last meeting. But then today, with the blessings of God, I have got that opportunity. Okay. Much can be said about Srikanth, and most of you all know about him also. No, not only a fair gentleman by looks, but also by the nature and how he conducts himself in the court. He is a person who is having immense knowledge, and his depth of knowledge can be witnessed in the last session. He went through the various definitions and how nicely he interlinked the definition with the provisions of the Act and explained it to us was a remarkable thing. We all cherished and enjoyed it. And today we are again here to enrich ourselves. And I'm not going to stand more between y'all and Srikanth. Even I'm eager to hear him. And I also got certain questions. So waiting for Mr. Srikanth's address. Over to you, Mr. Srikanth.
Thank you, Ashok Pati. I don't know, you have spoken very high about me. I do not know whether I stand for it. Anyway, I'll try to make ground and come closer to what praises you have assured on me. Yeah, with this, I'll commence my submissions on the HRNC unlocking provisions. As I told, I'm just sharing my knowledge. The knowledge which I gained in association with my late uncle, Mr. M. Subramania Rao, who had practiced for more than 50 years in this singular branch of law. Therefore, in this association, whatever I have gained, what little I have gained, I'm trying to share with you all. Thanks for this opportunity. I thank the organizers for having chosen me to talk on this topic. Yes. Last time, I did not know that the time schedule slot allotted to me because I was going elaborately, and at the end of 2 hours, I was cautioned to continue in the next session. Therefore, now we are in this session. Yes. As a matter of recollection, last occasion, we saw that the definitions of as contemplated in section 6, which would attract the provisions of the HRNC Act for any religious institution to be brought under the purview of the enactment. So that to a greater extent, it could be summarized as follows. In a sense, the religious institutions have their own peculiar form of coming into being, peculiar reasons for having been installed or incarnated. As we have seen, if we go to the village temples, of course, urban temples are being almost consecrated by body of individuals, by way of registering a society, or some old temples here and there, few temples. But when you go inside and into the rural areas, every temple will have its own significance. You could get the significance from the name of the deity, the presiding deity itself. Let me just tell one small 2 or 3 examples for it. Like if you have been to Acharapakam, we have known that it is Acharapakam, but in Tamil it is Achu Iru Pakam. In a sense, we know that Sthala Varalaru, temple history, that the chakra which was laid for some purposes came and landed in that place, and it broke into 2 pieces. Therefore, to consecrate and to have that as a commemoration of that event, the deity therein is named, and the place is also named like that. And yet another important aspect, as we are all in legal profession and craving for hearing, a fair hearing, adi alterum partem, it only brings me reminds me of the fact that there is a big temple in Tirunelveli district, Tirupudai Marudur, on the banks of Tamaraparani river. There, says Sittar Karurar, who was wandering all the way, going to all shrines in the Tamil Nadu, was wandering and he was passing through the banks of river Tamaraparani. And he sights a temple on the other side of the banks of the river. The river was overflowing. However, he could not cross the river so as to go there because he has to go travel a long way. But he could not resist himself and going, placing his oblations to the Lord. So from there, he sings a song in praise of the Lord. And the Lord there is named Narambunadar. If you could go, you could see the Lord hearing the devotee's voice. He would slightly incline towards left, and the Murti there in the temple is inclined left. So that is how the significance has been made. Every temple has its own significance. So therefore, now coming back, these significance have been taken into consideration while framing this act, so that the autonomy, the very exclusivity, the very peculiar nature of the temple has to be maintained. So these aspects are found mentioned in various provisions, particularly the trustees who man the temple. Now coming to the trustees, here we have seen that the trustees who are appointed are categorized. Namely, if it is a denominational temple, the right of appointing belongs to that denomination. If it is a scheme temple, the manner of appointment of the trustees are contemplated in the scheme itself, which will be the constitution of the temple, Magna Carta of the respective temple. And if none of these provisions are attracted, or as we say in drafting of these pleadings in temple matters, we will usually say the origin of the temple is lost in antiquity. This is how we used to draft. When once the origin of the temple is lost in antiquity, then comes the management, wherein trustees will be appointed usually by the department. In such cases also, provisions are there in section 45 and also in section 26 qualification. It specifically says that person having the local knowledge, namely the institution, religious institution, yes, we can come. 26, section 26. The religious institution, the peculiarity of the religious institution is safeguarded by fixing up qualifications and an attachment to the person who has to man the temple. So these are the significant aspects upon which the management has to be done, and that is how the act has also been codified. We have come below 26A, B, yes, we can come. Unsound mind, if he has acted, he has a sentence, a person shall be disqualified. I think we'll have to go to 25A, the previous provision, 25 capital A, 25 capital A, yes, qualifications of trustees. Has faith in God, if he possesses good conduct and reputation and commands respect in the locality in which the religious institution or endowment is situated. So the act takes care only to this limited extent, that he commands respect and reputation in the locality where the religious endowment is situated. These are the facets where the law which transgresses into the autonomy, some safeguards have been made. See, every provision, to the extent to which the act is applicable, is that extent to which the autonomy of the temple is compromised. That is how I visualize, I see this. Now, there are certain provisions which we have gone through in the last occasion, and where we saw that individuals who would want to be part of the management have all been classified, nature of institutions, manner in which such relief could be got, which we saw in section 63, and whether grant or otherwise, the remedy available therefrom up to 70 we saw. And there are certain provisions which we'll have to come back again from the top, so that we can run through the enactment. After a constitution of the trust board or the grievances of the existing trustees have arisen, they have come to court up to 70. Now we'll go back to section 5. We'll come from the first now. Section 5. Section 5. Section 5 of the Act, certain acts not to apply to Hindu religious institutions and endowments. The following acts shall cease to apply to Hindu religious and endowments, namely Tamil Nadu Endowments and Escheats Regulation 1817, which has been modified from time to time, as we saw on the last occasion. It was modified 1863, 1890. The first of the enactment, which came in 1920, the Charitable and Religious Trust Act 1920, to greater extent was taking care. And thereafter came 1951 Act, upon which the Sirur Mutt's judgment did away with almost all the provisions, particularly which infringes the right of a denominational character in a temple. Therefore came 1959 Act, and in 1959 Act, Section 5 specifically house. But however, for our purposes, we can see Section 5E, Section 92 and 93 of the Code of Civil Procedure, Central Act 1908. As we have seen, by the passage of time, lot of religious institutions and lot of properties and lot of mismanagements have also crept in. Therefore, there was a need for a very, very special statute which completely deals with secular aspects in a religious institution for the purpose of managing the properties and also day-to-day administration was a need. However, prior to the coming into of this special statute, Section 92, with the permission of Advocate General, schemes would be framed. The schemes would be the Magna Carta or the constitution for the respective temple, and the manner in which the governance and the administration of the temple has to be conducted. Therefore, when a special statute took the field in the form of the HRNC Act 1959, in Section 5E, the ouster of the earlier section upon which schemes were framed has been specifically made. Yes. Then we have seen definitions, etc., etc. We'll run through. We'll go to now Section 29. Section 29. Yeah, 29. Preparation of register for all institutions. For every religious institution, there shall be prepared and maintained a register in such form as the commissioner may direct. A, the origin and history of the institution and the names of past, present trustees and particulars as to custom, if any, regarding succession to the office of trustee. B, particulars of scheme of administration and tittam or the scale of expenditure. C, names of all officers with their salary, emoluments, etc. D, very important, the jewels, gold, silver, precious stones, vessels and utensils and other movable belonging to the institution with regard to weights and estimated value. Particulars of all other endowments and institutions and all title deeds and documents. F, particularly particulars of the idols and other images in or connected with the institution, whether intended for worship or for being carried in processions. Particulars of ancient and historical records with their contents in brief. Such other particulars as may be required by the commissioner. The most important aspect here is this register, if had been properly maintained from the inception of the act in the year 1959 onwards, we would not have seen that this idol wing, etc., etc. Lot many idols have been stolen from the religious institutions, etc., etc. Because we do not even know such a provision exists and it has to be recorded. Now, after all these bad experiences, the state has made several rules so that all these are now idols particularly have been asked to be uploaded in the webs so that anybody could have an access and find out what are the idols a particular temple has. The idols particularly, it says F, particulars of idols and other images in or connected with the institution, whether intended for worship or for being carried in processions. Intended for worship will be Moolavar. Of course, it's a stone idol. It cannot, stone idols, of course, its worth is only on spirituality, but however, they are idols that are being carried for processions are the ones which go missing frequently, which had gone missing also. Therefore, this 29 register is the document for every temple, which if accessed by the public, which is accessed by public, would throw a lot of light about the nature of the institution and also the manner of its functioning and about its properties. So it will be a watchdog for any outsider to keep a track of the temple and about its properties and about its management or plus and minus whatever has happened. Now, this provision this provision has to be implemented. The state has a duty to see that this 29 register is updated, is properly maintained, and it is also available for public access. It's a self-contained safeguard, which is a very crucial section which has to be. And now any person who would want to know about the nature and functions or the catalyze or the endowments made will also be found in this 29 register, a copy of which will throw everything, will throw light on all the aspects of the temple. Therefore, this is a crucial section which has to be implemented meticulously so that the properties of the temple as on date could at least be saved in future. The next provision which I would feel is important is section 34. Section 34. Of course, 31, 30, 31, 33 are all connected with updation of section 29 register, Pittam, which has been specified there. 34. Alienation of immovable trust property. The commissioner or any other officer, any 34, yes, any exchange, sale or mortgage and any lease for a term exceeding 5 years of any immovable property belonging to or given or endowed for the purpose of any religious institution shall be null and void unless it is sanctioned by the commissioner as being necessary or beneficial to the institution. So it is a negative section where it says it is null and void unless sanctioned by the commissioner. Now there is further rider in the form of proviso which has been included to this to say that proviso, amended proviso, yes, which was inserted by Act 38 of 1998. The proviso says, provided further that the commissioner shall not accord such sanction without the previous approval of the government. So therefore, the ultimate say of any property belonging to a religious institution to be dealt with, if it is a lease, etc., above 5 years, it ultimately vests with the government. And section 34 further goes on to 34 being the specific section which deals with the properties endowed to the religious endowment. The subsequent 34, 34A, etc., will also deal with the nature and the manner in which the properties attached to a religious institution shall be dealt with. Coming to 34A, 34 capital A, fixation of lease rent. 34 capital A. 34 capital A. Yes, fixation of lease rent. Now the proceedings before the authorities under the HRNC Act, almost 50% of the proceedings are now occupied by this lease rent fixation, and 78 proceedings where eviction proceedings are being undertaken from the properties which have been leased out by the religious institution. So therefore, this section, these 34 and related eviction section of 78 will assume significance. Here, fixation of lease rent. The lease rent payable by the lessee of immovable property belonging to, given, endowed for the purpose so and so shall be fixed by a committee consisting of joint commissioner, executive officer, or the trustee or chairman of the board of trustees. This is from the temple's point of view, as the case may be, the religious institution, and the district registrar of registration, who would provide the guideline value of the property in concern for which the fixation of fair rent is made. Guidelines thereunder and may be prescribed, and as such lease rent shall be refixed in like manner once in 3 years by the said committee. Now here there are three categories of persons who sit in the fixed fair rent committee, namely a temple representative, a representative from the registration department, and the temple's trustee, or there is no trustee, being he will be represented by the executive officer or the fit person appointed. So temple by the natural governance, temple by the officials from HRNC, namely joint commissioner and district registrar. And here in this case 34A, interestingly, the entire, I don't want to read the entire section. the entire section 34A does not state that while fixing the fair rent for the leasehold property, the person in occupation is not at all called before the fixation of the fair rent. The Act doesn't say so. However, after fixation, subclass 3, 34(3) says that any person aggrieved by an order passed under subsection 2 may, within a period of 30 days from the date of receipt of such order, appeal to the commissioner in such form and in such manner as may be prescribed. Therefore, while fixing, the person in occupation, namely the lessee or the person who is in occupation, is not at all taken into consideration. This is which is lacking herein. However, by judicial intervention, though in the absence of a specific provision, the principles of natural justice have been read into in a judgment which I'll shortly give. So, therefore, after fixation of this fair rent, next comes 34B, capital B. 34 capital B, yes. Termination of lease of immovable properties. The lease of immovable property belonging to or given or endowed for the purpose of any religious institution shall be liable to be terminated on non-payment of the lease rent or on violation of any of the conditions. Violation of any conditions is always available. Now, as we saw in 34 capital A, there is no opportunity given to find the correctness or participate when not participate, at least to give some feedback or some data about the property to which the fair rent is to be fixed. Now, such a fair rent, if not paid, would amount to, you will be would amount liable to be terminated under 34 capital B. Now, 34 capital B is one form of termination of lease. Stopping here for a moment, we have seen that non-payment of lease rentals or any other violation of the conditions imposed by the so and so would operate to terminate. There are two other modes of termination also. Stopping here, there is yet another section which we need not go now. It is section 80. It's section 80 because when we speak about termination, these are the provisions. Section 80, here also we have seen that in the temples, in big temples and all, shops and other lease properties are within the precincts of the temple, though not inside the main prakaram. Or we have seen Srirangam temple and Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple and all. We have seen that the precincts of the temple, there is a lot of shops and leasehold property will be available for commercial purposes. Now, section 80 says if any of these properties which are leased, if it mars the religious environment, religious atmosphere, if it mars the religious atmosphere, then they are liable for termination. The next important provision, though if it is endowed to the temple, if it is strictly a kattalai endowed only to the temple, then under the Transfer of Property Act, section 106, termination can be effected. Now, the distinctness of all these three types of termination would be slightly, the relief against which such termination is slightly different from the other modes of termination which are usually pressed into service. If termination is made under section 34B, then if termination under 34B, section 80 or section 106 of Transfer of Property Act, the immediate legal impact is that there happens a severance of the jural status of a lessor, landlord and the tenant, or lessor and lessee. Therefore, now when a tenant is, under any of these circumstances, if the lease stands terminated, next comes eviction of the person whose lease has been terminated. Eviction of eviction proceedings under section 78, as we let us not go to 78. 78 by itself a code, as we say in section 21 in the CPC itself a code. 78 itself is a code. It has lot many intricacies, and as I told, it's more than 50% of the present litigations are under 78 only. Therefore, now the provisions of the Act which deals with the physical eviction of the lessee whose lease stood terminated is available under section 78. Now, what happens? The termination and section 78. I am not going to go elaborately on 78. 78. There are two categories. 78 says if a person who is lawfully in possession whose lease is terminated in either of these categories stands to be called an encroacher under the provisions of 78 to 78B. Then any person whose any person means he may be a successor, interest, or a person who has not been recognized, or a subtenant. Any person who occupies religious property of a religious institution without proper lease or other documents, etc. These are the categories. So let me not go there now. So therefore, these are the three types of terminations which we saw. Now, if the property, the landed property would have been taken on lease, over which superstructure would have been put up by the lessee, then in such circumstances also, if the termination happens for that property, there is a separate proceeding under section 34C to assess the improvements which the lessor of the land has made in the property. Yes, that shall be paid an amount to the lessee for the building, superstructure, and trees, if any, erected or planted in accordance with the terms of the agreement or with permission of the commissioner, so and so, by the lessee on the property vested with the religious institution under section 34B. Here, this assumes significance. On termination, 34 will go up. 34B subsection 3, 34B3. On termination, just above. Yes. On termination of the lease under subsection 1, the property shall vest with the concerned religious institution, free from all encumbrances, and the executive officer, trustee, or the chairman of board of trustees, as the case may be, of such a shall take possession of the property, including the building, superstructure, and trees, if any. So therefore, the termination operates to vest the property. Of course, physical possession, as I said, will have to go only through the process contemplated under section 78. Now, the inquiry under section 78, of course, it's a full-fledged inquiry. It happens. Now, coming to the next provisions, section 40. Yet again, this is a code by itself. This has to be had on a separate sessions, because enfranchisement of lands, etc., held by Devadasi. Of course, Devadasi is now abolished. Therefore, whatever lands which have been given as a condition for service, vest in the respective Devadasis. Of course, Devadasi is no more existing. It has been abolished. 41. Similar provision, analogous to that one of grant for service being made. Resumption and re-grant of inam granted for performance of any charity or service. Any exchange, gift, sale, or mortgage, lease of term exceeding 5 years for the whole or any portion of inam granted in support of the maintenance of the institution for the performance of a charity or service connected therewith of religious charity, made, confirmed, or recognized, shall be null and void. Similar analogous provision to section 34, meaning the person for whose services inams have been granted will have to perform, and he cannot, as is found in 34, could alienate, mortgage, etc., exchange, etc. If done so, it is void. So this again, this will take us to several other enactments of Minor Inams Abolition Act, etc., etc. So just for the sake of going through the provisions, 41 was referred. As I told, 34, 41, and 78 are code by themselves. It requires separate session. If we go into it, there is a lot of fund of knowledge which has to be run through. Now let me go to section 45. The other day, 45. The other day, we saw about this executive officer who is a paid servant appointed by the department, and under what circumstances. As I told, it was in civil appeal numbers 106206220 so and so. In 2014, the judgments have already been given. This appointment of executive officer, in the rules made under the Act, the appointment of executive officer has to be done in terms of the rules to be framed under the Act. There is a separate rule here which I'll take through at a later time. Now, after the Chidambaram temple's case was decided in 2014, GO 260 was passed by the government, framing rules, wherein as per the statute, any executive officer could be continued only for 5 years. The ceiling has been made in GO 260, which is available on online. GO 260 in the year 2014. Now, appointment of executive officer, I'll run through the provision, the much so and so and so. I'll only read the provisions, proviso to the act. Of course, appointment of an executive officer is done by administrative exercise of the authority by commissioner or joint commissioner. I'll only read the proviso, provided that only such powers and duties as appertain to the administration of the properties of religious institution referred to in subsection 1 shall be assigned to the executive officer. Therefore, colloquially, we feel that executor is omnipresent and he can do and undo things in a temple. It is not so. Executive officer itself, the tenure itself is 5 years, and he has to perform such of those functions which has been assigned to him, and the assignment of such powers will be peculiar to the religious institution for which an executive officer is appointed. So, all these aspects, if these provisions would only show that the autonomy, the exclusivity of the religious institution, to the extent possible, will have to be upheld. The intrusion in the form of these officers going into the temple should be very minimal, so that the exclusivity of the temple is maintained and not infringed upon. Now, of course, it after 45, 46 is the one through which the state publishes the list. Listed temple, unlisted temple. If any of these provisions is attracted by any religious institution, they annex it and they have it as listed, which listing is made under section 46 of the HRNC Act, which you call as a listed temple. The distinction between listed and non-listed temple mostly is that a temple, a religious institution might not have been tested for the category upon which it comes under, unless some proceedings are initiated by the persons in management to get themselves exempted under section 4, or to declare it as not coming under the purview of public religious worship under 63A, or to accord themselves as hereditary trustee under 63B and a scheme under 64. If any of these have not happened and a religious institution has not come under the scanner of the HRNC authorities, it would remain non-listed. This is one category about the nature of the institution. Another category is that if the religious institution is a small one and the annual income is below 10,000, then such of those religious institutions are not included in the list published under section 46. So now the distinction is, it is listed or non-listed. Therefore, listed temples are under section 46 listed. And 47, we saw the other day itself, trustees under a number and terms of office we have already seen. Now, the trustees, as we have seen up to 63, that there may be hereditary trustees who get themselves declared under 63B, or scheme trustees when a scheme is framed under section 64. Apart from these two, there are general temples where the direct appointing authority is vested with the government and trust board is being appointed. Here, for the purpose of appointment, the listed temples trustees are appointed under section 47. Non-listed temples, section 49. Of course, we need not go to 63. We'll stay here in 47. 47 is the authority for appointing trustees in a listed temple. Again, listed temples, there are categories. Cases falling under 46.1, cases falling under 46.2 will be commissioner, cases falling under 46.3 will be government. These three categories are only, these three categories are made depending upon the annual income of the temple. Income in the form of donations and the contributions, a devotee who gives it to the temple. That is how. These are financial categories upon which the segregation is made. 46.1, 46.2 and 46.3, namely joint commissioner, commissioner and government. Now, here, interestingly, there is a provision for appointment of fit person. We could come to the proviso. We could come to the proviso 47. We could come to the proviso. After section 47C, there is proviso. Yes, provided provided that the board of trustees constituted, no, next second proviso, yeah, provided further proviso, provided further that in addition to the persons appointed with the joint commissioner or deputy commissioner, as the case may be, pending the constitution of the board of trustees under this subsection, appoint a fit person to perform the functions of board of trustees. Here comes a terminology which is fit person. Fit person, as we all know, even according to going by the section, fit person is a transitory appointment or a stopgap arrangement which is made for a specific period, namely when the board of trustees are to be constituted. In the stopgap period, there has to be some person who is manning the temple who will be the fit person. Here, the peculiarity of section 47 is that the fit person would per se take functions of board of trustees, fit person. This is where in 47, 49 also, you need not go to 49. 49, non-listed temple, where the assistant commissioner is the competent authority to appoint trustees, wherein also pending constitution of board of trustees, fit person will discharge the functions of board of trustees until a competent board of trustees is appointed. Now, these are the two occasions in a general temple directly under the purview of the HR&C department. 47 and 49, fit person is to be appointed. Now, there are other provisions also where fit person appointment is permissible, where we'll go to 53. 53 speaks about disciplinary proceedings, where power to suspend, remove or dismiss trustees. This is the 53 is the provision where the persons in management, if found to be delinquent, the authorities have the power to frame charges and take disciplinary proceedings against the person in management under section 53. Where 53, you see that in respect of trustee so and so. 53 subsection 4, yes. Pending the disposal of the charges framed against the trustee, the appropriate authority may place the trustee under suspension and appoint a fit person to discharge the duties and perform the functions of trustee. Here also, so 47, 49 and 53, all these provisions give an authority to the respective officers in the hierarchy to appoint a fit person as a stopgap arrangement pending constitution of the trust board or the trustee individually. Now, the next provision will be 54.3. 54.3. 54.3, yes, 54, section 54 speaks about filling up vacancies in the office of hereditary trustees. So here, 54 deals with a contingency where the office of the temple, trusteeship of the temple has been declared to be hereditary and somebody is already appointed as hereditary trustee. And if vacancy, a permanent vacancy or a temporary vacancy, as is found in section 54, 1 or 2 or 3 occurs, the next in line of succession will be recorded. As we have already seen that the recording of the next in line is not, it is not an adjudicatory process, it is only an administrative process. Give an application, have yourself recorded. Here, what happens? Here also a contingency, which the law says that in the proviso after 54.3, 54.3, let me read. When a permanent or temporary vacancy occurs in such an office and there is a dispute respecting the right of succession to the office, meaning if the hereditary trustee dies, he may leave lot many legal representatives as his successors. However, in the management trust board or management, if the legal heirs within themselves consent one among them to represent as hereditary trustee in the place of the deceased hereditary trustee, then it will be fine. Otherwise, there will be disputes among the family members, or if a person who was holding as hereditary trustee had more number of branches of lineage who succeed to him as legal representatives, if there is no unanimity among themselves as to who should represent, or everyone should come and function as hereditary. Of course, hereditary trusteeship is a multifaceted office. It need not be singular. If the hereditary trustee dies, all his legal heirs even can become hereditary trustees. However, they can have within themselves some arrangement in rotation to be in office or in management. Of course, it is not though as if next in line means it is not singular. Next in line, everybody can be hereditary trustee, subject to their own arrangements which the legal heirs of the deceased hereditary trustee make themselves. Now, next in line of succession, if a permanent vacancy arises or there is a dispute respecting the right of succession to office, what happens? Gives right to the authorities to appoint to the proviso. Proviso will come to the proviso. Proviso. When hereditary trustee by reason of unsoundness, so and so, so and so, the joint commissioner, deputy commissioner, as the case may be, the joint commissioner, deputy commissioner, before explanation, as the case may be, appoint a fit person to perform the functions of the trustee. It is very something is missing here. In my considered opinion, I would humbly say that when the section itself speaks about filling up of hereditary trustee, but however, the joint commissioner, when a temporary vacancy, when the permanent vacancy arises and there is no unanimity among the legal heirs to occupy the office, joint commissioner or deputy commissioner, as the case may be, appoint a fit person to perform the functions of the trustee. So it is not hereditary trustee. The act is very clear. So therefore, in my view, that a hereditary trustee's absence, the very appointment of fit person itself is fallacious. It's uncontemplated. And the trustee of the institution, until disability of the trustee ceases, or another hereditary trustee succeeds to the office, or for such other shorter term, the legislation is conscious that in the place of 54(3) appointment, the tenure should be shorter to the extent possible, minimal, because that's a hereditary temple. Autonomy could not be invaded into by appointing somebody as fit person in the office of trusteeship in the temple. This is why so, because Act does not define anywhere as to who is fit person and what is fit person. Act is silent as to who is fit person. Fit person in colloquially we say takar niyamanam. We say the fit person the situations came to the fore for many considerations in the various courts, and particularly in our High Court, that where in case of a dispute among the family members of a deceased hereditary trustee, it is wholly fallacious or it is not proper to bring in some outsider or a third party to be as a fit person in the place of the deceased hereditary trustee. That is why the law takes care and says for such a shorter period. And in the explanation, in making any appointment under this section, the deputy commissioner, joint commissioner, as the case may be, shall have due regard to the claims of the members of the family, if any, entitled to the succession. So therefore, such is the safeguard given. However, unwary legal heirs and legal representatives of such deceased hereditary trustee, by infighting, they leave it open to the authorities to come. And once if the authorities come and manage in the place of hereditary trustee temple, we may know that the consequences of which might even change the character and nature of the institution itself over a period of time if allowed to be operated. Now, the next category where fit person will be appointed is under 64(4), scheme temple. 64(4). This is yet again a serious infringement into the autonomy of the religious institution, because 64, the opening words say 64, when the joint commissioner, deputy commissioner, as the case may be, has reason to believe that in the interest of proper administration of an institution, a scheme could be framed. Meaning, it's a suo motu authority given to the joint commissioner or deputy commissioner, as the case may be. If has reason to believe that in the interest of proper administration of institution, a scheme should be settled, or when not less than 5 persons having interest make an application. This is second. There are two limbs of attracting a scheme, namely the suo moto power given to the authorities under the Act, and or by 5 persons belonging to a body of administrators who are in office. They may be connected as a body under a registered society. They may be connected as a same line of community, same line of religiosity. Lot many circumstances unifying common factor among themselves, which may be of various what we call as community temple. If they are not able to satisfy 63A to come over as not a place of public religious worship, or if they are not able to get a denominational declaration under Article 26 by way of filing a civil suit, the next best third option available is to frame a scheme. Some commonality of the Mahasabha, what they call, which consists of members of like-minded. They may be society, there need not be like-minded, but the society as such will have a like-minded objects, and the admission of which also will be to such of those persons who subscribe to the common object of the society, and or the community which majority community which they form as a Mahasabha, and for their propitiation a deity is installed in the form of a temple, and a religious institution comes into being. So therefore, when the authorities under the Act, Joint Commissioner has reason to believe that there is mismanagement, he can suo moto appoint frame a scheme for the administration. Now, let us for a moment keep the second limb, namely, or when not less than 5 persons having interest make an application. So therefore, if I make an application under section 64(1) for framing of a scheme for our community, for the religious institution which we are in administration, here, there also the statute gives an authority to appoint a fit person under section 64(4). This will be the most, in my humble opinion, most inappropriate provision, giving unreasonable authority to the HRNC authorities to intervene into the community temple. If fit person is appointed in a scheme temple where the scheme petition is pending, namely, if I let us now come to the second limb. If it is mismanagement and suo moto scheme proceedings are initiated by the authorities, 64 subsection 4 might be of, there also, in my opinion, I would not subscribe, but there is some justification for appointing fit person. However, in my petition, if I am the petitioner, if I along with 4 or 5 others seek the Joint Commissioner by way of filing a petition under 64(1), in such circumstances also, the authorities under the Act, under 64(4), pending the settlement of scheme and for an institution, the Joint Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, as the case may be, appoint a fit person to perform all or any of the trustees thereof and define his powers and duties. Of course, the caution here exercised is the legislation has been more cautious here, which is not found in the other 3 provisions where we saw fit person is appointed. Here, fit person to perform all or any. The delegation is only to a limited extent, whichever the authority feels, the Joint Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, whoever feels that only such of those authorities to be performed by the fit person, which otherwise would have been performed by the trustees, and thereof, and define his powers and duties, which is found missing in other 3 provisions where fit persons are appointed. So it is a definite delegatee with a definite purpose and also definite time for which he has to function as a fit person. This is very draconian in my view, because let us assume that it's a community temple and a scheme application has been made and it is pending adjudication. In the interregnum period, if a fit person, usually the department now appoints executive officer who is a paid employee of the department as fit person, which is wholly unauthorized, which is directly making violence to the Act and autonomy of the religious institution. Because as we saw the scheme, or as we saw that the scheme is only for the governance and also to regulate the administration for ever so many reasons, on our own or by suo moto being made. Now, if the if the executive officer who is an employee of the department is appointed as fit person, he may have to perform the duties of a trustee. Trustee per se would also have to perform certain religious duties, and therefore, if a person who is supposed to perform only secular duties, that to an employee of the department, is permitted to operate in the name of fit person to discharge the functions of a trustee, it operates to violate the autonomy and the exclusivity and the religiosity of the respective religious institution. It would amount to exercising religious performances through an official who is only there to see secular performances are being made in a temple. So therefore, this in my humble view, is definitely a violence made to the worshippers and the autonomy of the temple, which is uncontemplated, and particularly appointing executive officer of one temple as fit person to another temple is wholly doing violence to the act. Now, in these circumstances, only safeguard which by judicial pronouncements have been made is to give a prior notice before appointing a fit person to a temple. There are lot many judgments, but I would only only subscribe few judgments here. Section 2006 2 CTC 49, 2006 2 CTC 49, AIR 1991 Supreme Court 1117 1117, 2012 Madras High Court 3783. These are the of course they have discussed in depth about as to how fit person, why fit person, etc. 2006 2 CTC 49 is the one. 2016 1 CTC page number 9. 2016 1 CTC page number 9. This judgment, of course, their lordships have gone in depth and have also have interpreted as to when a fit person, how a fit person, why a fit person, under what circumstances intercede when a vacancy arises under 54(3) and a vacancy or a suspension happening under section 53(2), 53(2) or 53(4). 2016 1 CTC page 9 certainly throws a lot of light, and their lordships are distinguishing as to when 53 proceedings are initiated against the trustee. 53(2) is the punishment proceedings, wherein the punishment might itself be suspension, and 53(4) is pending suspension. Now, this distinction is made when 53(2) suspension is given as punishment, wherein the appointment of fit person would be for a longer tenure, whereas 53(4) suspension is for a temporary period pending inquiry. So, and the remedy available therein also are different. Remedy as against 53(4) pending suspension will go to revision before the commissioner under section 21. However, 53(2) suspension, which is given as punishment, would endure an appellate remedy to the person affected. Now, coming back, 64 fit person, etc., etc. So this is the manner in which fit persons are, though not defined in the act, fit persons are appointed, and executive officers are appointed at fit person, which really is a concern. Certainly such practices should be avoided. And before going to that, section 51 gives another safeguard. 51 says the general omnibus provision in section 51, which says claims of certain persons to be trustees. The government or commissioner so and so, assistant commissioner, in making appointment of trustees under section 47, 49, 49A, as the case may be, shall have due regard to the claims of persons belonging to religious denomination for whose benefit the institution concerned is chiefly intended or maintained. Here, though the section says only 47, 49, it would be extended even to 64(4) in operation, because that is more important, because denominational temples only a community temple or denominational slightly not able to establish under 26, they come under the scheme. Therefore, this 51 will have to be considered. If 51 itself is considered, no executive officer could be appointed when a pending scheme application under 64(1) is pending under 64(4). So 64(4), 51 will be a direct bar for appointment of a fit person when pending application in 64(4). This is what their lordships have discussed elaborately in the Andiyappan's case, which we call as 2016 1 CTC, page 9, which I have given already. Now moving to from thereafter, we'll go to chapter 7. Chapter 7, which starts from section 77. Yes, 77. So the chapter itself speaks about encroachment. And as I told, this is a code by itself. This chapter itself can be discussed for more time. Anyway, we'll run through the provisions. Of course, what are the appurtenant lands concerning the religious institution will also be covered. And we'll come to 78. 78. Encroachment by persons on land or building belonging to the charitable or religious institution or endowment, and the eviction of encroachment, where the Assistant Commissioner having jurisdiction, so moto or upon complaint made by the trustees has reason to believe that any person encroached upon any land, building, tank, well, spring, water course, or any space, wherever situation belonging to the religious institution or endowment, he shall report the fact together with the relevant factors to Joint Commissioner having jurisdiction over the division in which religious institution or endowment is situated. Explanation: for this purpose, encroacher shall mean any person who unauthorizedly occupies. So here, the dictionary meaning of encroacher is not will not be simpliciter applicable for this section. Encroacher as a special meaning, of course, lot many decisions are there. Encroacher, there was challenge that I am not an encroacher, I am a person holding over. My protection under Transfer of Property Act is always there. A person whose lease gets terminated will be a lessee holding over. All these were deprecated because encroacher for this particular section, for this enactment, is the one as defined in this section. For the purpose of this section, the expression encroacher shall mean any person who unauthorizedly occupies any tank, well, spring, or water course, or any property, and to include. So it means that unauthorizedly, what is then unauthorizedly occupies? Any person who is in occupation of the property without the approval of the competent authority, sanctioning lease or licensing. Any person may be sublessee, encroacher, occupier, anybody. But B is more important. Any person who continues to remain, who will be otherwise under transfer of property, a lessee holding over. Any person who continues to remain in the property after the expiry or termination or cancellation of the lease, mortgage, or license granted to him. So there are two categories here. One, 78 1A speaks about a person has no authority to occupy, is unauthorizedly occupant, will be coming under 78 to be declared as, called as encroacher. B, though the original occupation of the property of the religious institution is proper and through proper documents and legal, however, his continued possession beyond a point where a termination has happened, as we saw in 34B, or if the lease is not renewed, or any other conditions of the lease is violated by him, he also becomes an encroacher because of attracting section 78B. So therefore 78B, now 78B proceedings are apparent and rampant. Now all the religious institutions take umbrage under 78 for eviction proceedings. Lot many, most of the, as I told, at least exaggerated, not exaggerated, 30 to 40% of the litigations are now arising from 78 proceedings. 78 proceedings only. Now, thereafter, of course, 78 says as to how the eviction proceedings are to be conducted, and while conducting the inquiry, the Joint Commissioner is supposed to give notice. 78 proceedings before passing an order of eviction. All the trappings of a regular inquiry as contemplated under Civil Procedure Code, etc., has to be extended to the person. Thereafter, an order passed under 78 would be enforced through the other provisions under 79, where police authorities are also to support the religious institution to recover possession pursuant to the eviction order passed by the Joint Commissioner, and the recovery of money due to religious, etc., etc. And now coming to section 80, because we have seen this chapter itself is about encroachment and eviction. Section 80, we already discussed that the lease could be terminated under section 80 also, where I don't want to read it. As I told, in the precincts of the temple, there will be lessees having commercial establishments or whatever it is. If their activities mars the religious environment, then eviction can be made. I will only read the taken on lease here. Prakarams, etc. Outside the precincts thereof, or any space within or outside the prakarams, mantapams, courtyards, or corridors of religious institution has taken any action which has marred or is likely to mar the artistic appearance of the religious atmosphere of the religious institution, Assistant Commissioner shall report the fact to the Joint Commissioner, and proceedings for eviction could be taken. Now, for this particular termination or eviction, there is a remedy under section 81, the next provision. Of course, constitution of tribunals, suits against award, section 85. And now we come to chapter 9. Chapter 9, which is finance, which starts from section 92. Section 92. This in my opinion, literally means that every temple is an assessee, as if for the income tax department, everybody individually assess. All the religious institutions are assessees. Here, the slab rate of taxation which has to be paid has been fixed. Religious institution to pay annual contribution to the government. Every religious institution shall, from the income derived by it, pay to the commissioner annually such a contribution not exceeding 12%. For what? From its income as prescribed in respect of the services rendered by the government and their officers, and for defraying the expenses incurred on account of such services. So this is how the autonomy is being autonomy of the religious institution, financially also, to the extent where the financial instrument religious institution is supposed to pay 12% for the services rendered. Now, section 92(2), every religious institution annual income for which firstly immediately so and so for the purposes of subsection not less than 5,000 shall pay to the commissioner annually for meeting the cost of auditing such further sum not exceeding 1.5%, and in case of income up to 5 lakhs 4% per annum. So therefore 16% of the income of any religious institution will have to be paid for the so-and-so services and the audit fees which the statute provides. And there were lot many litigations here as to what will be the, how to assess this income. In some cases, the executive officers who are manning the institution would include the receipts received from selling immovable properties, which is the capital receipt. They were not able to make any distinction, and litigations were fought up to Supreme Court to make a distinction that receipt from selling of immovable property could not be taken into for the purpose of contribution and audit fee. So this is how it happens. Anyways, section 92 and 93 also. This is in my humble view, it is a tax paid by the religious institution, a fixed tax depending upon the income you come under, whether you come under 1.5 to 4% for the audit purposes. But however, 12% will have to be paid as contribution for the so-and-so services. And more particularly, this apart, the respective officials who are manning the religious institution, their salaries are also paid from the respective income derived from the temple. This apart, this is a standard slab of tax which is being levied, and the salaries ulturai, salaries, appointed, etc., are also being taken from the coffers of the temple. This is how it stands. That is how the act. Now, 92 and 93, recovery of cost and expenses for legal proceeding. The act says all will be debited to the temple's account. And we will move on to chapter 11. Chapter 11, though titled miscellaneous, has very important provisions which has to be at least run through and discussed to the extent possible. Miscellaneous, furnish copies of extracts of certain documents, so and so. As I said, custody of any records, reports, registers, such instance, frame may be required by the commissioner. This is what 29 register will form significance. And power to inspect 100, section 100. Section 100. Section 100. Bequest under will for benefit of religious institution. Where under any will a bequest has been made in favor of a religious institution, or where such bequest itself creates a religious institution, it shall be the duty of the executor under the will to forward a copy thereof to the joint commissioner, deputy commissioner, assistant commissioner of the division where such will may have been or is required to be registered. No probate shall of any such will or letters of administration with will annexed shall be granted by any court unless it is satisfied that the copy of such will has been forwarded to the joint commissioner as provided under subsection 1. It is very interesting. See, in this, there may not be an executor, or the person who seeks probate or letters of administration might not even know that it constitutes it constitutes a religious endowment, or it constitutes a religious institution by itself. However, there is a prohibition for the court unless a copy is granted. Anyways, in operation, to my limited knowledge, I have not seen, but trust being created or any katalai being created in the will, obviously the beneficiaries are going to perform it. But under it says no probate shall be. There is a bar for the court from granting probate or letters of administration if I have not furnished a copy to the concerned authority within whose jurisdiction the will or the religious institution is supposed to be there. Anyways, the provision as it stands. And next is 101. Interestingly, this act takes into its fold almost every enactment. It's a self-contained code. However, this is a very interesting section where section 101 gives authority to seek the assistance of a magistrate, jurisdictional magistrate, to take possession by a trustee, who take possession from the trustee from a person who has been appointed to man the religious institution. Here, as we say, a recalcitrant trustee who is unwilling to hand over the charges, then under section 101 of the HRNC Act, a certificate from the commissioner will be obtained as to what are all the properties and what are all the registers of the religious institution wherein a new person is to assume office in the place of a deceased or whatever trustee. Then the unwilling trustee who is not willing to hand over the charge of the religious institution, then the person with a person appointed as a present trustee, or the official who is appointed as the executive officer or fit person with the certificate issued from the commissioner can go approach the jurisdictional magistrate under section 101 and seek the assistance of a criminal court to oust the trustee who is recalcitrant and unwilling to give the hand over the charge of the religious institution. The next provision would be section 105. Of course, 104, it has, at the end of the provision, there is a chapter where the relief which is sought for the respective court fee which has to be paid, meaning thereby HRNC Act even makes an exception to the Tamil Nadu Court Fees and Suit Valuation Act. Even the court fee, what has to be paid for respective relief, is being given in the schedule, which that is what section 104 says. And 105 savings. Save as otherwise provided in this act, rules made thereunder, any honor, emolument or perquisites to which any person is entitled by custom or otherwise in any religious institution or is established usage in regard to any other matter, be or authorize any interference. Therefore, this is a bar where if any emoluments, honor, or perquisite being given to a person, if a person entitled to as a custom in the religious institution, section 105 gives a protection in the form of savings which has been codified there. Now, and after section 107, next one will be 107. Of course, 106 is the removal of discrimination, where everyone are entitled to Tirtham and Prasadam. As to what Prasadam and Tirtham is also defined there and in the explanation. And we come to section 107. Section 107, act not to affect the rights under Article 26 of the Constitution. Of course, it goes without saying. However, the Act in its wisdom in section 107 ensures and guarantees that whatever is guaranteed under 26 of the Constitution, Article 26 of the Constitution, will certainly be available to those who are coming under the purview of the Act. So to that extent, the autonomy will not be deprived. That is what this section, in my understanding. And another next important provision would be bar of suit, section 108. Section 108. Yes. No suit or other legal proceeding in respect of administration or management of a religious institution or any other matter or dispute for determining or deciding which provision is made in this Act, for which provision is, religious institution or any other matter or dispute for determining or deciding which provision is made in this Act shall be instituted in any court of law except under and in conformity with the provisions of the Act. So it's a negative section. So it restricts any relief being sought before a common law court of such of those relief which are available under the provisions of the Act, which will be granted only by the authorities constituted in the Act. So therefore, nobody can directly approach a civil court to declare themselves a hereditary trustee, or nobody could go to a court to asking for a framing of a scheme. Likewise, so any dispute determining or deciding which provision is made in this Act. So therefore, when a provision is available under this Act, then the common law remedy before a civil court is prohibited, except in conformity with the provisions of the Act. Therefore, section 8. And this has been elaborately stated as to what is prohibited, what is not prohibited. As we saw in section 105, certain religious emoluments, etc., though within the temple, that could be granted only by taking evidence by a civil court by way of a declaratory decree, which will be judicial in nature. There will be a subtle distinction as to what is amenable to a civil court and what is not amenable to a civil court. In 2015, 8 MLJ 738 would be the in wherein the court has elaborately dealt in as to what will be the scope of a suit of some of related to the religious institution, which will fall completely outside the purview of the Act, but within a common law remedy before a civil court. 2015, 8 MLJ 738. The next provision would be section 109. 109. Again, ouster clause. Though section 5 specifically ousts application of 5 different acts. Here, an exception is carved out. Section 109. Nothing contained in Limitation Act 1963 shall apply to any suit for possession of immovable property belonging to any religious institution or for possession of any interest in such property. Meaning thereby, a suit filed by a religious institution could not be resisted on the ground it is time barred. There is no limitation for the recovery of property, a suit instituted by a religious institution for the recovery of property by a religious institution. Limitation Act per se is not made applicable to the provision, because as we have discussed earlier, the deity in a temple is supposed to be a minor. So minor's interest in perpetuity is the safeguarding the minor's interest in perpetuity is the duty of the court, and court itself acts as trustee when it deals with minor's property. Therefore, these technical objections of limitation should not come in the way of recovery of property, and therefore applicability of Limitation Act is made not applicable to the suit filed for recovery of possession. And section 110, another important provision where how inquiries should be conducted, particularly under chapter 5 and 6, because 5, as we discussed, 63 to 70, deals with conferring of various rights, which a party seeks to be granted by the authorities constituted under the Act after conducting inquiry. Such of those inquiries are to be conducted in the manner which 110 says. Applicability of Civil Procedure Code minus 92, as we saw, and the Indian Evidence Act. And the third is the immunity granted to the officials who adjudicate matters. The commissioner or joint commissioner, I'm reading section 110 subclause 3. Holding such inquiry or hearing, such an appeal shall be deemed to be a person acting judicially within the meaning of Judicial Officers Protection Act. 110. And we go over to 114. 114 is the government's power. Government's power to call for records and revise. The government may call, again this is suo motu power, the government may call for and examine the record of the commissioner or any trustee in respect of the proceeding, not being proceeding in respect of which suit or an appeal or application to a court of an appeal is government provided under this Act. Let me stop here. 114 revisions are usually filed against the orders of the commissioner passed in exercise of section 21 of the Act, which is a revisionary jurisdiction available to commissioner. Now, the government can do and undo under this provisions of 114 and 114 capital A, the next provision. Here, government can review its own orders which has been passed under any provisions. Even under 114, as we saw, revision is filed against the orders passed by the commissioner under section 21, and after passing orders under section 114 by in way of exercising revisionary jurisdiction by the government can revise its order under section 114 capital A, of course under contingencies specified therein, as if some new document or changed circumstances, etc. Government can review its order. Next will be 115, limitation. This limitation speaks about the exclusion of the time for obtaining orders. So the time for obtaining orders is excluded from the applicability of the limitation prescribed under the Act. Namely, if a person is aggrieved under order passed in 63B, he should file it within 90 days. Or if a person is aggrieved under order passed under section 69, he should file a 70 statutory suit within 90 days. All these days, the limitation shall run only after the certified copy is received from the authority. That is what. Thereafter, we will come to 118. 118 is a very interesting provision, where, as we saw, that the very Act itself is a consolidation of the earlier enactments, and certain changes being made in 1951 Act, it came into force. Now, repeals and savings, 118. Tamil Nadu HRNC, which are here now referred to as, stands repealed. 51 Act is repealed, 118.1. We are more concerned with 118.2A. 118.2A. All rules made are deemed to have been made, notifications or certificates issued or deemed to have been issued, orders passed or deemed to have been passed, decisions made deemed to have been made, taken, so on so, to have been taken, schemes settled or deemed to have been settled or done or deemed to have been settled by the government, so on so, insofar as they are not inconsistent with this Act, be deemed to have been made, issued, passed, taken, settled or done by the appropriate authority under the corresponding provisions of the Act, shall have effect accordingly. Therefore, the the schemes which have been settled earlier will have to be given effect to accordingly to the provisions of this act. B1 will be more clearer. If any provision contained in any scheme settled or deemed to have been settled under the Tamil Nadu HRNC Act 1926 or a scheme settled under section 92 of the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 and in force immediately before 30th September 1951 is repugnant to any provision contained in this act or the rules made thereunder, the later provision shall prevail and the former provision shall to that extent of the repugnancy be void. Here, there are two limbs of this section, namely, if the schemes earlier framed are in consistence with this provision of the 1959 Act, to that extent it is saved. If it is inconsistent to the provisions of this Act, because of the repugnancy, it is declared to be void. Now, an interesting question arose in this connection is that what happens to the schemes which were framed under 92 by the courts, by the judicial authorities which were exercising jurisdiction under 92 of the Civil Procedure Code. Schemes have been framed for the management and administration of the religious institutions. So therefore, a question came whether a scheme framed by the court of law exercise of 92 could be amenable under section 64(5) of the present 59 Act. There was a challenge, and which ultimately went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that in the deeming provision which has been contained in section 64(5), a scheme even framed by the court under exercise of section 92 of the Civil Procedure Code is still amenable to the Joint Commissioner exercising jurisdiction under 64(5) for modification of the scheme. So now it is settled that though a scheme would have been framed by a court of law, by coming into operation of this 1959 Act and by the saving clauses made in section 118, read with section 64(5), the scheme which has been framed by a court of law is now amenable for modification at the hands of the jurisdictional Joint Commissioner if a modification of the scheme is sought. This is elaborately stated in 1998 6 Supreme Court cases, 643, a celebrated case which went from Kanjipuram. 1998 6 SCC 643. Yes, I think we have almost covered all the provisions. The rest of the provisions are under conditions of service, etc., Board of Trustees, and 2021 21A. So with this, I have tried to express myself in the manner which I have understood the provisions of the Act. So it's now, if anybody has any query, to the extent possible, I'll try to explain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srikanth. Your unlocking had been very, very extensive and with all details. It was not that you just gave us a key, you told us how it works, and each provision and each explanation, definitions, powers. I think we are really enriched. Any person who had no knowledge about anything on this Act would have now become a master by himself. So we will now leave it open to the participants to have any clarifications or any doubts to be raised. You can either drop in your chat box or raise your hand so that we can unmute and you can have a word with Mr. Srikanth. I think Mr. PBR sir is there ready. Thank you very much, sir, for joining. Mr. PBR sir will be unmuted now.
My pleasure. Srikanth, I just want to congratulate you for this wonderful, enlightening. For me, especially, some of the sections are really enlightening. You daily their fixation procedure, the rent that is being fixed by the fixation committee,
yes,
you're giving an opportunity to the occupant, definitely upon the principles of natural justice.
yes,
You highlighted that.
yes.
And also, I appreciate you when you said sometimes the executive officers who are appointed on an interim basis, a temporary basis,
Yes.
called fixed persons.
Yes.
Definitely, they are unfit persons. Most often, they are unfit persons. In so many words, they explained it. I really enjoyed it. enlightening. I learned many things from you. Thank you very much, Srikanth.
Obliged.
Eh?
Pleasure from getting blessings from you in the form of.
Good, keep it up.
And here, I would want to give one more citation. Then pertinently, question was asked that when the fixation of parent is made, no opportunity is given. Only after fixation an objection is called.
Yes,
Where
yes,
this
yes.
fell for consideration, where a division bench comprising Justice Prabhat Sridevan in 2009 6 CTC 512 Angala Parameshwari Temple's case, where the court had said that 2009 6 CTC 512, where the court said that after termination there is no point in giving you an opportunity of being heard, because the termination itself is the fallout of non-payment of the fair rent. So when the tenant
Without
or household-
opportunity.
yes, the tenant or the lessee or the person in occupation himself did not have an opportunity even at the time of fixing what is fair rent.
The person rightly expected.
Yes, by imposing this fair rent, non-payment of which will ensure 34B termination. So what is the? It's only empty formality of giving an opportunity post termination. Yes.
Natural justice principle violated.
Yes. They have read into, despite though it is not expressly provided in 34 capital A, the court still said that you will have to have the
Executive officers are acting as fit persons.
Yes.
They take away the powers of the trustee.
That is unacceptable. It takes away the autonomy and
The spirit of the act. Upon the letter and the spirit of the act.
Yes.
Letter and spirit of the constitution is being affected.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Srikanth.
Deeply obliged, sir. Blessings for me.
There is one query in the chat box by Raghavendran. He says, sir, whether Ubhayadarargal who is donating, taking over specific auspicious day of a temple can claim it as a matter of right.
Now, is it by way of monetary compensation or by dedication of some properties? What is whether it is a religious charity or endowment?
He has not said. He only uses the word, sir, whether
Ubhayadarargal
who is donating, taking over specific auspicious day of a temple.
Yes.
Claim it as a matter of right. Probably saying if they have specified a date when they want to make a donation, can they claim it as a right that on that day I should only be permitted?
This is a matter, a raging controversy where who has to perform what and who will get the first honors, etc. This we do not know. What is the nature of instrument and what is it intended and which of the definition it attracts and how is it made and whether the temple has similar catalyze on the same day, order of priority. Lot many factors will have to be taken into consideration. There is no question of any right here. You only get an order of priority. And where is the question of right here? I don't know. What is the right? I do not understand. Maybe it depends upon, we can answer only more facts are given to us in the form of nature of Kattalai, the instrument creating the Kattalai, and any other Kattalai on the same day, and what is the nature of the institution. Lot many things will have to be known. Yeah.
Then Rajesh Vivekanandan has raised a question saying, fit persons are taking assumed charge without resorting remedy under section 101.
Yes.
Read it as probably a statement.
Yes. Because you are state machinery yourself. What will be the poor trustee individually do? Unless proper legal backup and proper advice is given, that recalcitrant trustee, to my understanding, can be recalcitrant. You cannot just like that throw him away by coming and taking over or by putting a overlock, etc. That is what they are doing. I think my friend Vivekanandan is referring to such situations where the assistant commissioner will pass an order. Even that order would not have been communicated. All of a sudden, an overlock will be there the next morning. So that is how things are happening. Very, very draconian in operation. But however, despite safeguards being given in the statute, like in my understanding, the trustee, howsoever bad, he can be recalcitrant. The act says how you will have to remove a recalcitrant trustee. Unless you undergo the procedure contemplated under the act, these are all excesses. Maybe the person affected may not be knowing what rights are available to him under the act.
Thank you, Srikanth. There is one compliment by Charumatiyan. Thank you, sir, for excellent, very detailed session. And we have Mr. A.K. Sriram.
Oh, Sriram.
Sriram had been throughout both days on Thursday as well as today. Of course, today he had joined a bit late.
Yeah. So Sriram has already given his version exclusively on section 78. So I think Sriram should consider having one more session on 78. So it will be available for all of us. Will be throwing more light on the subject and subject to
Srikanth.
study circle.
Srikanth, thanks to Om and Siva and whoever is the study circle group for having such an exhaustive, presentation of the HRNC Act. Actually, I personally think it is not criticism, but I really think that you are in the wrong profession. You should have been a professor or a teacher. The earlier session, in the session, I was late because I was held up outside. But bonus session was just too much. It was, each and every small bit of the act was, everything was set out in great detail.
The legacy left behind by Mr. Rao.
Absolutely. I totally agree. But what I'm saying is, I have one small, probably your query for what you said now.
No, you cannot have query, Sriram.
To Rajesh Vivekanandan, you said that they cannot. They will have to necessarily invoke section 101.
Yeah.
Okay, at the prima facie, I'm also in agreement with that. But just tell me something. Let us say that a trustee's term is admittedly over, and you know the speed at which the HRNC department works more than me. Okay, so 2 years after the term is over, a fit person is appointed. At which point of time are you still of the opinion that the provisions of 101 should be resorted to? I'll ask you why.
Yeah.
I will give you unless the trustee puts it down on paper that yes, my term is over, in spite of which I refuse to hand over the temple and its properties and its assets to you. Unless the trustee takes a stand like that, what is the necessity to go in for 101? It's a serious question.
Yeah, serious question. Yeah.
So what is your opinion?
Yeah. See, if the term of the trustee is over, certainly it would be from a general temple, which is completely under the control. There, such contingency would not arise. These contingencies arise only in small temples, where person in occupation might also be managing the temple. So your contingency after expiry of the period of office will arise only under 47, section 47 trustees. Therefore, the contingency would not arise. The contingency almost arises under section 49 temples only. See, we do not know what was the attachment, how he became trustee, and who gave him the tenure, etc. So this happens, and you telling as an excuse that at what speed the department will travel or how 101 proceedings are conducted cannot be an excuse at all. We do not know, because person in management, he may have even a trace of some linkage to the founding members of the religious institution. So
He could.
to that extent, we need to definitely respect as I said, it's about autonomy. The degree of interference only is given in the act under various provisions. To what extent you could make inroads, that is what the act speaks. In my condensed view, my humble view is that to what extent you could make inroads into the autonomy. That is the act. So therefore, 49 alone this contingency arises, never in 47, because 47 almost you say that change in government or the next board will automatically see to that they are eliminated. There that doesn't happen. Big temples, small temples where some management, some attachment to founders family or something of that sort, or a village temple who have been in long management, there only this contingency arises. I think you will agree with me. I'm wrong, correct.
Yeah, most of the times it's like that.
49, yeah. Only ACs are the persons, assistant commissioner temples. They are only the persons who go and put a overlock, etc., do every damn thing. Yeah.
Or in other words, assume charge.
Assume charge. Where is assume charge in temple in HRNC? Of course, you are defending most of them, therefore you will be knowing.
No, but you cannot be defending the indefensible.
Correct. I also agree. I mean, if it is so grave that the trustee has been so delinquent and it is apparent, then of course extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary remedies. But overall, there's some attachment for the persons in management to the temple. Therefore, their autonomy and their attachment to the temple will also have to be considered, and to a greater extent that has to be given weightage also. You cannot just like that throw them away as you do with some order. He is after all an employee, but I am connected to the temple. I am connected to, you may go, you may be transferred, you may retire, you will go, you'll be no, you are absolutely an alien as regards the affairs the temple concerned. Maybe I would have been delinquent. That doesn't mean rank alien could throw another person who has some connection religiously or spiritually to the temple, who had been in management for quite some time. Yeah. So anyway,
I agree.
Again, 49 alone this contingency happens. 47 doesn't happen.
இல்ல 47ல இது மாதிரி நடந்திருக்கு,
but that will happen in a different manner. Yeah.
But you're right, 49ல தான் this is more prevalent.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks Srikanth. I thought இதுக்கு நான் ஃபுல்லா இருக்கல. போன வாட்டி வந்து I thought it was brilliant. I mean, seriously good. Seriously good. I think we'll have a new text apart from Rajaram.
No. I'm not that competent. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure.
We have one or two more compliments for Srikanth. Sen Manoharan had said, enlightening session, exemplified all the provisions. Thank you, sir. We are almost to the end. There are no other questions. And one of our participants would in fact say that it was a very detailed session. There is no question of any clarifications being sought at this stage after being explained fully. So now let me take Sriram is trying to say something.
அந்த பார்ட்டிசிபென்ட் கிட்ட போன செஷன் வந்தானான்னு கேளு. But seriously, last session was one of the most detailed sessions. I mean, not that I have attended too many sessions. In fact, Mano வந்து என்ன திட்டிட்டு இருப்பான் because I have never attended any session, to tell you the truth. Because it was Srikanth, because it was the HRNC Act, I came. I did not expect it to be so detailed. It was incredibly
detailed. It went beyond. It was superseded every time limits. So detailed.
No, that is okay. That is okay. But almost வந்து ஒரு scholarly tinge to his presentation. அதனால தான் சொன்னேன், fit to be a professor or a teacher. Okay, all the best.
Yeah. You told that I misfit to the profession. Thank you. Later.
In conclusion, I will just take permission of Srikanth to just say a few words of thanks on behalf of the study circle. When we had various sessions in the study circle, I need to tell you about at least three things. One is that we have a YouTube channel. And there have been all these lectures have been uploaded in the YouTube channel. We have many participants, viewers viewing the YouTube channel. I was just scrolling often once in a while. I found that there is only one comment in the YouTube channel. And one of the viewers has said that, we would like to hear an extensive session on HRNC Act. So this was the only comment which was available on the YouTube channel. So this had become so prominent, we needed to have this session. Initially, I need to be very frank also, when we speak about HRNC session, we also think about Sriram. And I spoke to Sriram as well as you almost simultaneously. And Sriram said, I am already doing a session mostly for the officials on a Sunday. He said, if you are free, please join. Otherwise, you can definitely ask Srikanth to do it. So this is one aspect which I thought about it. And secondly, the very object and purpose of the study circle for long had been that we have to enlighten ourselves. We have to share our knowledge, which was done in a small circle of friends, finding ourselves a time at weekends or sometime within a week on a particular time. And with this pandemic, we came to a different avatar where we had gone for this online program like webinars. And of all the sessions, I would frankly say that on the object of enlightening, your session had been very, very wonderful. In fact, you had been the, as Sriram was telling, a scholarly talk for the members for having get to know about the one of the interesting enactments. And when I spoke to you, you had also said that I will think about what is the topic and I'll give you on HRNC Act. And you came out with a statement saying the unlocking the provisions of HRNC.
To be frank, it was given by my junior colleague, Mr. Ganesh.
And that had been really an unlocking session.
Yeah.
And the other day when you were on the session, we did not in fact ask you how much time it is going to take, or we never had a plan that it will go for 2 sessions rather. It was 1 session which we had planned. Though it was 2 hours, I should frankly accept that there had been no grievance from anybody. No participant, I would think, had felt that it was going for a long time. You had all the participants logged in and nobody was leaving. It was our concern as an organizer that the session was going too long. You may also get exhausted. And we felt that after a period of time, the concentration towards the program will be lost. So we thought, let us have it as a second session. And you had also rightly agreed for that. And you had obliged with spending so much of time. And this session had also been very, very good on carrying forward from what you have left from Thursday. Thank you very much, Srikanth. Thanks a lot. We had known you as a very committed lawyer. We have seen you as a person who had always observing things in courts. You would see that encouraging juniors, or any time when we had seen, you would be discussing some point or other. So as Sriram said that you now more qualified to be a professor. So thank you very much. On behalf of all the members of the study circle, I extend a very, very hearty thanks for having spent so much of time for the cause of the law. Thank you very much. Thanks one and all for having joined in the session.
Deeply obliged. Deeply obliged. Thank you. Thank you.